Joshua chapter 9. Okay, where are we historically? All right, we crossed the Jordan River. We brought the troops across. We brought the 3 million Jews from the wilderness over into the Promised Land. First battle was the Battle of Jericho, absolute success. The second battle was what?
Ai.
Battle of Ai, that's right. And what happened the first go-round?
Soundly defeated.
Soundly defeated and humiliated, and Joshua wanted to go back on the other side of the Jordan River again. But what mistake did they make?
They didn't ask God for directions.
They
That's
followed,
right.
followed their own selves directions.
Followed themselves. And in fact, the main thing that they didn't do, which is one of the things that we often don't do, what should they have done? They should have waited on the Lord, right? Because the second time they went to battle with Ai, after God told them, He assured them that I'm going to put these people into your hands, then they had total victory. But also, one thing they didn't do is they didn't wait on the Lord, but also we learned that part of the reason for their defeat was what?
Sin in their midst.
Sin in their midst. They were regarding sin in their heart. And so, and we talked last time in some detail about what the nature of that sin was. One of their ranks, a guy by the name of Achan, what did he steal? What did he take from Jericho?
Gold and silver.
That's right. He took a Babylonian robe. He took a bar of gold and a bar of silver, and he coveted those things. And one of the things that he did that the Bible recounts is that he declared them good. We see that in verse 21. In verse 21, chapter 7. My translation says that he saw things that were beautiful. Well, the word is not really beautiful, it is good. He pronounced things that were under the ban good. In other words, that which God says that you shall not partake of, he declared them good. And again, the sin is very similar to the sin of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. In other words, that which God had forbidden, they said, no, I'm going to take that to myself. And we talked about how the things that he took were really the antithesis of circumcision, because they really undermine the whole purpose of circumcision, which is really what the conquest of the Promised Land is about. It's about being wholly dedicated to God. It's about taking possession of that which God has promised. It is about venturing from where we were before into to the point where we are wholly consecrated to God. We're living the sanctified life, and that's really what the whole of the story about the conquest of the Promised Land is about: taking possession of the sanctified life, which is really what God wants all of us to do. So we've had successful battle, totally successful battle at the Battle of Jericho, using an absolutely unorthodox and nonsensical battle plan, which is basically what? Doing exactly what God tells you to do, even though it doesn't make sense. And then the second battle, the Battle of Ai, they did things their way. They lost, and then they waited for God to speak, and then they were successful in the Battle of Ai. Now, before the fighting continues and before the violence that Tommy gave us a preview of continues in chapter 10, we have a rather strange account of the Gibeonites in chapter 9. So let's read through that. Let's try to figure out what that's all about and why that's stuck in here. Jack, you want to start reading for us in Joshua chapter 9?
Now when all the kings of the west of the Jordan heard about these things, those in the hill country, in the western foothills and along the entire coast of the Great Sea, as far as Lebanon, the kings of the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, they came together to make war against Joshua and Israel.
Pause right there. So we see that what is going on as the Jews have moved into the Promised Land, the surrounding kings are gathering together to try to put together a single army, a single battle plan to defeat the Jews. Tommy asked before a good question, I think it was last week or the week before. We got such a small parcel of land here. The entirety of the land of Canaan is about a fourth the size of the state of Louisiana, yet we're talking about all these kings. We've got a half a dozen kings mentioned here. What's going on? Well, we'll see later on that the kings really are more like a mayor, if you will. The kings were kings not over a vast domain. They were kings over basically a city. We're going to see that there's a king of Hebron, there's a king of Jerusalem, there's a king of these various towns. So that's what they were. But each one of these separate cities were like city-states or city countries. They had their own separate form of government, and they had a king that was in control of all of them. But anyway, so they're all gathering together because they know, they've heard rumors that, hey, these Israelites are moving in on us. What their plan is to take over all of our land and to kill us off. They've already been successful in defeating 2 rather large cities, so we need to band together and muster all of our forces and combine our forces to push them back. All right, read on.
Okay, question. Do these places all have walls?
Well, we don't know. They probably did. You'd think if they had a king in that form of a government, they'd have some sort of protection. Some of them are referred to as walled cities. Some are referred to, I think, as fenced cities. So they had some sort of
Boundaries?
some sort of boundary, some sort of protection around them.
Okay.
And at least they had armies. They had kings and they had armies. Some of them had walls, some of them had fences. But that's about all we know.
However, when the people of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they resorted to a ruse. They went as a delegation whose donkeys were loaded with worn-out sacks and old wineskins, cracked and mended. The men put worn and patched sandals on their feet and wore old clothes. All the bread in their food supply was dry and moldy. Then they went to Joshua in the camp of Gilgal and said to him and the men of Israel, "We have come from a distant country. Make a treaty with us." The men of Israel said to the Hivites, But perhaps you live near us. How can we make a treaty with you?"
Paul's right there. Jackie's translation says treaty. Anybody has a different word there?
Covenant.
Mine says covenant. And what we know, what did God tell the Jews while they're still in the wilderness, when they got to the promised land? What was the rule about making covenants with anybody
Do
in
not
it?
make a covenant
Do
with
not
any
make
of
a
them.
covenant
That's
with
right.
anyone.
Don't make a covenant with anyone. And why was that? Why did God tell them that?
Because he wanted them to totally destroy all of the people who were living in that area.
Right? For what reason? Just for bloodshed, just for violence, just to make for a good story? Last time he would suggest.
No, it was part of God's plan because of the sin that they had committed during all the years living in that land.
Yeah, they were very sinful people. They worshiped false gods. They built all sorts of altars and Ashtaroth, these various groves that they worshiped in. So the idea was just wipe everything out. Wipe out the people, wipe out their culture, wipe out all their places of worship, and just totally obliterate them. Why? Because this is going to be the new habitation of God's people.
Right, and also it would keep them from the sin that these other people had engaged in.
Yep.
I wonder too, like intermarriage, if that was a part of it.
Oh, yeah.
They
That
didn't, God didn't want that
Keep
at all.
them pure.
You want a pure
Right.
nation.
And they didn't worship the one true God.
Right.
No.
Solomon shows you what happened. when he-
Yeah. Yeah, Solomon, he sure messed up big time. As wise as he was, the scripture pronounced him the wisest man who'd ever lived up to that point in time. But, even with that, he messed up big time.
The heart, huh?
That's right. All right, read on, Jackie, one more.
Where-
Verse 8, I think.
"We are your servants," they said to Joshua. But Joshua asked, "Who are you and where do you come from?"
I want to pick up there in verse 9.
They answered, "Your servants have come from a very distant land because of the fame of the Lord your God. For we have heard reports of him, all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the 2 kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, Sihon, king of Heshbon, and Og, king of Bashan, who reigned in Ashtaroth. And our elders and all those living in our country said to us, 'Take provisions for your journey, go and meet with them, and say to them, we are your servants, make a treaty with us.' This bread of ours was warm when we packed it at home on the day we left to come to you, but now see how dry and moldy it is, and these wineskins that we filled were new, but see how cracked they are, and our clothes and sandals are worn out by the very long journey." The men of Israel sampled their provisions, but did not inquire of the Lord.
Pause right there. So this is a pretty good ruse, pretty good trick that these guys pulled off, huh? I mean, it's interesting, what, the Gibeonites, when they send their entourage, their emissaries, if you will, to meet with the Jews. Now, what is their purpose there? Do they come with any evil intent? Do they come to try to spy them out, to destroy them?
Survival.
Survival, that's exactly right. Because they are smitten with the fear of the Lord, all right? They have seen certain things, they have heard of some other things. I mean, we read over and over again in the scriptures about the defeat of Sihon, king of Heshbon, and Og, king of Bashan. We see that time and time again. Evidently, those were some pretty powerful rulers of pretty powerful nations, because that's one of the things that said, hey, the Jews defeated them, nobody's been able to defeat them, so they've got something going on. And then they saw that they crossed over the Jordan, pretty big deal. Then they defeated Jericho, very big deal. Then they defeated Ai, big deal. Who's next? They know that they're on the march. And so what do they want to do? As Lon said, they're about survival. And so they come up with a pretty clever trick. So evidently they must know that the Jews, you think, they must think they're stupid. But they must think that they're people of honor, because they go there for the purpose of what? Of making a treaty with them.
So is a treaty or a covenant lawful if you've been deceived? Evidently it is.
That's an excellent question. We're going to explore that. And we're going to see later on, when we talk about who these Gibeonites were, that yes, the treaty that was made here, even though the Jews did not consult with God, what did we want to read in verse 14? So the men of Israel took some of their provisions. So in essence, they ate some of their moldy bread and they drank some of their stale wine. They made a covenant with them, but they had not asked the counsel of the Lord, so they made a covenant. So, good question, is the covenant, is that something they should be able to nullify because they were tricked? Well, under most systems of law, yes, it can be. But I think here, this did become a binding covenant, as we're going to read on. And why was it? Because of the Jews' absolute stupidity. The Jews may say, hey God, can we get out of this covenant? And he says, no. And here's why. You made a covenant based upon your own wisdom and your own understanding. You were wrong, but the problem was you didn't consult with me. However, it's going to be a binding covenant. Yeah, John?
Was Jericho the first battle after they crossed the Jordan?
Yep.
Well, Rahab said that everyone in the town is fearful of, so they must have heard that they were really bad coming across.
They did, yeah. Because the two of the great victories that they have won, okay? Jericho, as you know, is like right here, okay? Now, the two great battles, Og and Sihon, they would have been kings in this area right over here, just on the other side of it. So they probably would have been trading partners with Jericho. So yeah, the people in Jericho would have known, because, if they did business with those folks, they would know, hey, these people that we just, we used to trade with, now they're gone, they've been obliterated. Well, how did that happen? Well, it was because of the Jews. So yeah, that's how that came about. It's pretty close by.
Did God say to destroy them or negotiate? Or?
Jericho?
Yeah.
They said utterly destroy them, kill everything that breathes.
So they were all evil in
That's
his
right.
eyes in the town.
Yeah, with one exception.
The prophet Rahab.
Yeah, Rahab. Probably,
And her family.
That's right. And her family, she was engaged in a dishonorable profession. She probably was not very well thought of in the city, but God sent the spies directly to her. And why was that?
That brings up an interesting question, though. They made that covenant with Rahab without talking to God. At least it doesn't say they consulted God. It sounds like two spies.
Yeah, it is.
Interesting.
But it's interesting in that what's the similarity between Rahab and the Gibeonites?
Rahab was honest about what she
Yeah, she
did.
was honest.
Yes, she was honest, but what was it? I mean, it wasn't her honesty.
Fearful,
It was it?
fearful of God.
Exactly. That's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
Rahab feared the Lord. She saw these things, and what did she declare? She says, I know that your God, He's the God of heaven above and earth below. All right? And that declaration was sufficient for her salvation. Now, we don't see that the Gibeonites said exactly the same thing, but it's just about the same thing. Again, because they didn't come, the Gibeonites, emissaries, they didn't come to spy out or to seek to destroy. They wanted to make peace. Why? Because they recognized the power of the God who was backing the Israelites, right?
The thing of it is, though they were fearful of the Lord, the Lord told the Israelites to destroy them.
Right? That's
So
right.
because of their deception, though, they told them they were from a far country
Right.
and outside of the realm of what God told them to destroy within that. And it's what they told them, but that's not true. So
Yeah.
they did not consult with God about their strategy or their the Gibeonite strategy or Hivites or whatever. So that's the disconnect right there, is because even though they were fearful, God told the Israelites to do this.
Yeah.
So if
That's
they
it.
had consulted,
Uh-huh.
he would have told a different story.
I like your choice of words. The Gibeonites, they represented that they were outside of the realm of destruction. And that's interesting because they were sort of for the same reason that Rahab was outside of the realm of destruction, right?
Yeah.
God said, he said, go in and absolutely destroy everything, burn everything with fire. And he gave certain exceptions. So you can pull out the gold, you can pull out the silver, you can pull out the iron, you can pull out the bronze, but that goes in my treasure. But everything else, you kill. You can save Rahab. She is beyond the realm of destruction. Why? Not geographically, but spiritually, right? And so the Gibeonites, they pretended that geographically they were beyond the realm of destruction, but what they're declaring is that spiritually they're beyond the realm of destruction. In other words, they're worthy of salvation. Why? Because they're recognizing the power of God. They have the beginning of wisdom. The scripture tells us time and time again that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And the wisdom that's spoken of is of a high moral quality. It's something that connects us to God. It's a gift of God. Which starts saying, Kathy?
But no,
Oh,
what
Nancy.
I was going to say is that the Israelites used a ruse to destroy Ai after God
Yeah,
corrected them. But now the Gibeonites used a ruse
right.
to infiltrate the Israelites is really what they did. Because they brought
That's exactly right.
They brought the
Did it get
worship of
night?
other gods and sin, introduction of more sin into the Israelites.
Mhm.
Did they get a night later on in the future? Later on, did they ever become a thorn in the flesh for the Israelites?
The Gibeonites did not. I did a little bit of research, and we're going to read about them. But some of them that were not killed off did become a thorn in the flesh, but the Gibeonites were not. And we're going to read about that in a little bit. Okay, verse 15. Kenny, you want to pick up there?
Then Joshua made a treaty of peace with them to let them live, and the leaders of the assembly ratified it by oath. 3 days after they made the treaty with the Gibeonites, the Israelites heard that they were neighbors living near them. So the Israelites set out on the third day, came to their cities, Gibeon, Kephrath, Beeroth, and Kirith Jearim.
Okay.
But the Israelites did not attack them, because the leaders of the assembly had sworn an oath to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. The whole assembly grumbled against the leaders, but all the leaders answered, "We have given them our oath by the Lord, the God of Israel, and we cannot touch them now. This is what we will do to them. We will let them live, so that wrath will not fall on us from breaking the oath we swore to them." They continued, "Let them live, but let them be woodcutters and water carriers for the entire community." So the leaders promised to them was kept.
All right, pause right there a second. So basically, a curse is pronounced. They're going to let them live, but a curse is pronounced upon them, and said they will become what? They will become hewers of wood and drawers of water for the whole congregation. Okay, that's the pronouncement. All right, Kathy, you want to pick up verse 20? Pass Nancy.
Okay, but you gotta start with 22, right?
22. Yeah.
Joshua summoned them and said to them, "Why did you deceive us, saying, 'We are very far from you,' while in fact you are living among us? Now therefore you are cursed, And some of you shall always be slaves, hewers of wood and drawers of water for the house of my God. They answered Joshua, because it was told to your servants for a certainty that the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you all the land, and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land before you. So we were in great fear for our lives because of you, and did this thing. And now we are in your hand. Do as it seems good and right in your sight to do to us.
Pause right there. That's a rather confessional thing for them to say, right? Joshua says, why did you deceive us? Why did you lie to us? And they say, because it was certainly told your servants that the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you all of the land and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land. Therefore we feared greatly our lives because of you and have done this thing. So they heard about those promises that God had made to Moses and to the children of Israel. And so they saw them as very real, and rather than resisting them, as some of these other kings did, the Gibeonites are quite different from the other kings. And we're going to see that the Gibeonites, they were pretty powerful. It's not like they were a weak little king that without question would have been destroyed. They're a pretty big and powerful place. But they say, we've heard about what happened, and they say, now behold, we are in your hands. Do as it seems good and right in your sight to do to us. Wow.
What else could they do?
Huh?
What else could they do?
Well, they could have joined up with the other kings to fight.
No, but now that they've been found out. Oh, I see.
Yeah. So, and that's the real difference there. Behold, we are in your hands. Now, do as it seems good and right in your sight to do to us. Which is really the same kind of confession that all of us should make to the Lord, right? Recognizing that we have all been rebellious, that we are all, outsiders, if you will, that we are all sinful, and say, God, I know of your power, just do whatever you think is right. And so it's interesting that even though Joshua, in verse 23, pronounces a curse against them, ultimately they are blessed because of this covenant that they have made with Israel. All right, finish reading that chapter, Nancy.
And this is what he did for them. He saved them from the Israelites, and they did not kill them. But on that day Joshua made them hewers of wood and jars of water for the congregation and for the altar of the Lord, to continue to this day in the place that he should choose.
All right, so let's read about the Gibeonites. I don't know if you remember, I didn't really remember that much about them at all until I started a little bit of research. Let's look first at 2 Samuel chapter 21. 2 Samuel chapter 21. This is during the time of David. 2 Samuel 21 verses 1 through 9. Who's our next reader? John, you want to read or pass? Terry, you want to read for us?
Yes, sir. I had found secretaries. 2 Samuel.
2 Samuel chapter 21 verses 1 through 9.
Then there was a famine in the days of David 3 years, year after year. And David inquired of the Lord, and the Lord answered, "It is for Saul and for his bloody house, because he slew the Gibeonites."
Pause right there. So what's going on? During the time of David, there's a famine in the land. It lasted for 3 years. David went to the Lord and said, what's going on? And he answers that it's because of Saul, because he put some Gibeonites to death. These are the same Gibeonites that we're talking about here. They're still among the Israelites these several hundred years later. Read on.
And the king called the Gibeonites and said unto them, Now the Gibeonites were not of the children of Israel, but of the remnant of the Amorites. And the children of Israel had sworn unto them. And Saul sought to slay them in his zeal to the children of Israel and Judah.
Pause right there. So here's something interesting. We all know the story of Saul, that he started out to be a good guy, but he sort of degraded as he went along. It's reported to us here that the Gibeonites, obviously they're not the sons of Israel, they're a remnant of the Amorites, that is, some of the native Canaanite people, And the sons of Israel made a covenant with him that we just read about. These are the same people. So what happened? In his time, Saul had sought to kill them. Why? Because of God's initial command that when you go into the land, you're supposed to kill everybody, including the Gibeonites. So Saul thinks that he's going to pick up and he's going to do what Joshua should have done at the time but didn't do. Joshua was under the command to kill him. He didn't kill him. He made a covenant with him. So Saul says, all right, I'm going to do what God said, and I'm going to do better than Joshua, so I'm going to kill all these bad Gibeonites. Let's see what happens. Terry, read on verse 3.
Wherefore David said unto the Gibeonites, What shall I do for you? And wherewith shall I make the atonement, that ye may bless the inheritance of the Lord? And the Gibeonites said unto him, We will have no silver nor gold of Saul, nor of his house, neither for us shalt thou kill any man in Israel. And he said, What ye shall say, what will I do for you? And they answered the king, The man that consumed us, and that devised against us, that we should be destroyed from remaining in any of the coast of Israel, that 7 men of his sons be delivered unto us, and we will hang them up unto the Lord, and Gibeath and of Saul, whom the Lord did choose. And the king said, I will give them. Okay, but the king spared
Mephibosheth.
Okay, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, because the Lord's oath that was between them, between David and Jonathan, the son of Saul. But the king took the 2 sons of Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, whom she bare unto Saul, Harmony, and Memphis, whatever that was.
Mephibosheth, yeah.
Yeah. And the 5 sons of Michal, the daughter of Saul, whom she brought up for Adriel, the son of Barzillai, the Metholite. And he delivered them into the hands of the Gibeonites, and they hanged them on the hill before the Lord. And they fell all 7 together, and were put to death in the days of harvest, in the first days, in the beginning of barley harvest.
All right, pause right there. Wow, so that's kind of an interesting situation. So we know, here we are, again, I didn't make the count, but it's quite a few generations later. The Gibeonites are still living among the Jews, and Saul wronged them. Because of that, God cursed the land, sent a famine for 3 years, and what happens as a result of this? The Gibeonites say, give us 7 of the sons of Saul, and we're going to execute them. And it happened. That's the way it happened, to make atonement for the breach of the covenant. You think, what in the world? Why would that be? So who were these Gibeonites? What were they doing? And how long were they among the Israelites? Look next in Ezra. Who remembers the setting of the book of Ezra? What's going on in Ezra?
That's after they've come back from the exile in Babylonia.
That's right. After the Babylonian captivity. And of course, it wasn't the Babylonians who set them free. Who set them free?
The Persians.
The Persians, that's right. Cyrus defeated the Babylonians. Cyrus the Great, Persian, turns out to be, he's much more amenable to what the Jews stand for, and he sends them home. Ezra chapter 2, verse 43. Who's got that? Just read that one verse for us. 43 and 50.
The temple servants,
Yeah.
the descendants of,
That's really, all you have to read is those 2 words, the temple servants are referred to there, 43. And then look over in verse 58. Just read 2 words there. The temple servants. Okay?
58.
Yeah. So you see the reference to the temple servants,
Okay.
there's a unique word that's given to them, but who these folks are, the temple servants, they are the Gibeonites. And so, just as the curse was pronounced upon them, the Gibeonites became the temple servants. You remember when we first started talking about the sacrifice and we talked about all the burnt offerings? Lindsay sat in here and said, I sure wish I had the concession on all the wood for the burnt offerings. Well, guess what? The Gibeonites got that. It became the job of the Gibeonites to go out and cut and to gather all the wood that was used for the sacrifice in the temple. And they also became the water carriers. When they finally got to Jerusalem, they set up their place of habitation was over there on the east side by the spring of Gihon, where remember the water gate, where that was? They lived over by the water gate. Why? Because they were constantly having to go down to the spring and gather up the water and bring it up to the temple. So they were cutting the wood and they were bringing the water. And it's very interesting about these Gibeonites that not only did they live among the Jews, but what do we glean here from this account in Ezra?
They were with them during the exile and when they came back.
Exactly. They were so integrated into their society that they were part of the Babylonian captivity. They went into Babylon with the Jews, and then when they returned with Ezra, and we're going to see also in Nehemiah, so we saw that, look at Nehemiah 3:26. Remember, Nehemiah came back a few years later, 3:26. Somebody read that for us.
What was that, 3:26?
Yep.
And the temple servants living on the hill of Ophel, O-P-H-E-L,
Right.
made repairs up to a point opposite the water gate, toward the east, and the projecting tower.
Yeah, so what's going on here is this is the temple servants were there at the time of Nehemiah, so maybe some came back with him, I don't know. But at any rate, what chapter 3 of Nehemiah is about is building the wall, and it says the temple service, in other words, the Gibeonites, they were living in the Ophel, which is that area in the southeastern part of Jerusalem, and they're the ones who made repairs as far as the front of the water gate, which is where they lived, in the area of the water gate. Why? Because they passed through the water gate probably more than anybody else, gathering water for the temple service. So we see them, and I think the last reference to the Gibeonites as the temple servants is found in Nehemiah chapter 11. I think I wrote down the wrong verse there. No, it's there. No, Nehemiah 11, verse 3. Did you find it?
No, I found 1 and 7, talking about the temple servants.
Okay. Chapter 7?
Verse 46.
Okay, let's find that for us, 746.
It just lists the descendants,
Right, sure
the
does.
temple servants.
Okay, it has them there. And they're also referenced, I think, in,
So we have 3 and also 11.
yeah, it's, what Wanda pointed out to us was read that one again to us, Wanda?
It's, 746 says the temple servants and the descendants of a whole bunch of names.
Yeah. They're also referenced in in Nehemiah chapter 10, verse 28. It says, now the rest of the people, the priests, the Levites, the gatekeepers, the singers, the temple servants, and all those who had separated themselves from the people of the land to the law of God. So there are people who are dedicated to the law of God. And we also see, I think the final reference is in chapter 11, verse 3. Now these are the heads of the provinces who lived in Jerusalem, but in the cities of Judah, each lived on his own property. Their cities, the Israelites, the priests, the Levites, the temple servants, and the descendants of Solomon's servants. So here we are, and again, the significant thing we see about the Gibeonites is that they made this treaty based upon false pretenses. But God honored the treaty or the covenant to the extent that when Saul violated it, God inflicted a famine on the land, and God allowed David to offer up 7 of the sons of Saul to make atonement, if you will, for what Saul had done to the Gibeonites. And here we see that that the Gibeonites were so integrated into the society of Israel that what? They're taken into Babylonian captivity. They spend the 70 years there, and then they come back and they assist in the rebuilding of the city. It really is amazing, isn't it?
So do we believe, though, that they truly became fearful, they were fearful of the Lord, and that's why it continued on for so long, and they were allowed in the temple to do these jobs?
What do you think?
Are they fearful of the army?
Of course.
I think they honored their covenant.
Well, they did, and it's very interesting. What I see is this, that Joshua pronounced a curse upon them, right? And they were cursed, why?
Lying.
Because they
They
lied.
lied.
Because they lied, that's right. And plus because they were of an accursed people, right? They were the Canaanite people that God, basically they were people under the ban. But they beguiled the Israelites. The Israelites didn't talk to God, but nevertheless, they made a covenant with them. And it's a covenant that turned out to be a covenant for their own salvation, if you will. A covenant of redemption. And so why did God save them? Why did God protect them? Because those who were taken into Babylonian captivity, I mean, it was a form of slavery, but it was also a form of protection. Because it's either you're taken in captivity or what?
You died.
You get dead. Right? So you get captured or you get killed. So anyway, yeah, so God provides for their salvation. But it goes back to the question that Kathy asked. What was it about them that God saw as something that was worth saving? Was it because of their guile, or was it because of their fear of Him?
Because of fear of the Lord.
I think it was, because I think these Gibeonites saw that Israel had a powerful army, but it was not natural power, it was supernatural power, right?
But they, even though, if we read on, in fact, they're saying that the Gibeonites actually was a larger city than Ai,
Yeah.
and had a stronger army, so
Yes.
they weren't handicapped. I mean, they weren't.
That's right. It's not as if they were surrendered because they know.
That's right. I mean,
because
they
knew
could have
were
been trial for and fought,
Right.
they could have won, but I think they truly did fear the Lord.
That's exactly right.
And they learned wisdom from that, huh?
They did. Well, I mean, and that really kind of is the essence of wisdom. The scripture says over and over again, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So if you fear God, then there's hope, right? If you fear God, then God will draw you to Himself and make a way for your salvation, and He did. And salvation was made through a covenant. Again, I think kind of a foreshadowing of the new covenant that came through Christ. And it's because of what Christ did. We are all sinners. We are all basically Canaanites. But because of that covenant, then the curse turns into a blessing.
Well, look how many years that is. Because in Nehemiah, Artaxerxes was 445 BC,
Yeah.
and that's 1400 BC, so that's 1,000 years.
Right. Gibeonites were about that. And as far as we know, they continued with them. There's no further reference to them. But even at the time of Christ, they were still making their sacrifices in the temple, right? They still needed the wood, they still needed the water, as far as we know.
You reckon he's still over there?
Somewhere. Somewhere they're over there. I believe that, yeah. So, interesting story. Now you know the rest of the story about the Gibeonites, the temple servants. They got the concession. The deceivers, that's right. And of course, the Bible is full of stories about deceivers who were blessed with God. The chief deceiver was who?
Jacob.
Jacob, yeah. He was a deceiver. But again, at the heart of the deception of Jacob was what? He truly valued the birthright, unlike his brother Esau. He sold it for a bowl of red soup. Now, Jacob, he just really loved it. He really desired it. He valued it so much that he would do anything to get it. All right, and that's one of the few things that was laudable about him at the time, right? That he really valued the birthright. All right, let's read about another interesting and peculiar event if we get to it. This is in chapter 10. It starts off. Who's our next reader? Is that you, Sarah?
No,
No.
it's just, what?
Who's up next? You want to read? Sure. Chapter 10. Read just that first verse for us.
Joshua.
Joshua chapter 10.
Joshua?
Okay.
We've been all over the place.
It goes quick. That's the reason I always keep that on the beginning.
Yeah, you need a couple of bookmarks here to keep up with that. Just read that first verse for us, Joshua chapter 10, verse 1.
Now, Donnie, the deep king of Jerusalem, heard that Joshua had taken Ai and totally destroyed it, doing to Ai and his king as he had done to Jericho and his king. And the people of Gibeon had made a treaty of peace with Israel. And we're living near them.
All right, pause right there just a second. A couple of interesting things about this. This is the first reference in the scripture to Jerusalem by name. There was an earlier reference to Jerusalem, but by a different name. What was that?
Salem.
Salem, that's right. And Salem was the same city as Jerusalem. What's the story of Salem that we read about before?
That's where Melchizedek.
Exactly. Melchizedek was there, and who went to visit Melchizedek?
Well, Abraham came to visit Melchizedek.
That's right. Abraham came to Salem, Jerusalem, to visit Melchizedek, and that's where Abraham paid the tithe to Melchizedek. And you know, Melchizedek is that strange priest who lived there. Some said that it was that he was actually the son of Noah. That was actually Shem, who would have been alive at the time. We don't know whether that's true or not. But Melchizedek, it is said that Christ is a priest of the order of Melchizedek, having no beginning and no end. So Melchizedek was a significant character. But it's interesting there. His name was Melchizedek. This guy's name is Adonai-Zedek. So whether that's a family name, we don't know. But the name Adonai is what? Adonai is one of the names of God. Interesting about that. So anyway, that's what his name was. He was not a godly man, but he's the king there, and he's in Jerusalem, and so he's one of the ones that is trying to gather the troops to go up against Israel. So read on. Verse 2.
He and his people were very much alarmed at this because Gibeon was an important city, like one of the royal cities. It was larger than Ai, and all its men were good fighters.
All right, pause right there. So that tells us something about Gibeon. They didn't surrender because they were weak. It says what? Because Gibeon was a great city, like one of the royal cities, and because it was greater than Ai, and all of its men were mighty. So what do they recognize? They recognized that God was greater than they were, and they had no chance, even though they had all of the things that would bring about potential success. All right, Warren, you want to talk about
Verse 3?
Yeah, you can just jump over all those difficult to pronounce names because there's a bunch of them. Just call them by the first letter.
Yeah, so, Adoni Zedek, excuse me. Adoni Zedek came to Jerusalem Hill to Hohenheim, king of Hebron, and all these folks.
Yeah.
And come up and help me attack Gibeon. He said because it had made peace with Joshua and the Israelites. And the 5 kings of the Amorites, the king of Jerusalem, Hebron, and so forth, joined forces. They moved up with all the troops and took positions against the Gibeon and attacked them. The Gibeonites then sent word to Joshua at the camp of Gilgal, do not abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us. Help us because the Amorite kings from the hill country have joined forces against us. So Joshua marched up from Gilgal from the entire army, including his best fighting men. The Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid of them. I have given them into your hand. Not one of them will be able to withstand you."
All right, pause right there. Verse 8 is really the key to success, isn't it? That the Lord pronounces the victory even before the battle takes place. So once that is said, they know that that victory is assured. Sarah, you want to read?
After an
Verse
all-night
9. Yeah.
After an all-night march from Gilgal, Joshua took them by surprise. The Lord threw them into confusion before Israel, who defeated them in a great victory on Gibeon. Israel pursued them along the road going up to Beth
Horon.
and cut them down all the way to, as they fled before Israel on the road down from Beth Horon. The Lord hurled large hailstones down on them from the sky, and more of them died from the hailstones than they were, and then were killed by the swords of the Israelites.
Pause right there. Now that's something that will give you an idea that, hey Toby, welcome, that the Lord was against them. As they're fleeing, more of them were killed by giant hailstones than were killed by the sword. Okay, read on.
Go ahead, I'm not gonna, this
All
too many
right,
names.
Joanne, you want to read?
No, sir, I'm lost.
All right, Troy, verse 12.
Then Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Ammonites before the children of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, "Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and moon in the valley of whatever." So the sun stood still and the moon stopped till the people had revenge upon their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Jasher? So the sun stood still in the midst of the heaven and did not hasten to go down for about a whole day. And there has been no day like that before, in or after it, that the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. Then Joshua returned, and all Israel was with him to the camp of Gilgal.
All right, pause right there. This is a very interesting circumstance that occurs in the time of Joshua and the children of Israel. All right, the 5 kings gather together, and where are they going to attack first?
Gibeon.
They're going to go to Gibeon, and they're going to wipe out this big Gibeonite city. The Gibeonites had made a covenant with Israel, so the Gibeonites go to Israel and say, please save us, we're going to be attacked by these 5 kings. And so Joshua gets the word from the Lord, do it, and you'll be successful. And then what happens? They go to battle. First, these giant hailstones fall down, and the hailstones kill more people than the swords. But then Joshua speaks to the Lord in verse 12, and he says, "O sun, stand still at Gibeon, and O moon in the valley of Ajalon." And so the sun stood still, and the moon stopped. And it says, and there has been no day like this before it or after it. And it's interesting that at least 3 different cultures that I read about recorded a similar event in their secular histories. I mean, even as near to us as those who inhabited modern day Mexico. And I don't know if it was there were several cultures, whether it was the Mayans or the Aztecs or somebody around that. They recorded what they called a double day, a day that was twice as long as any other day. Also in the Near East, some of the ancient cultures recorded the same thing. So this, as bizarre as this is, it happened. God caused the sun to stand still, so he turned one day basically into a double day. And he did it, why?
Because Joshua asked him to, so that they could continue fighting that war.
That's right, so they could be totally successful, and they could wipe out all the enemies, and no one would escape. And you think, now that's rather bizarre. So what does that tell us? What is the spiritual significance of that, do you think? That we have this one event that God thinks this is so important that he's going to turn one day into 2 days, basically into a double day. What is this symbolic of? Make any connection? I thought about this. This is a strange thing, but what I thought about, what is the most significant day?
Easter, resurrection.
That's a significant day, all right, but what would we call that? Crucifixion? Yeah, all the same thing. But it's referred to as what? The most important day is, of course, when those historically occurred, but the most important day to us is when that day becomes real to me, all right? And that's referred to as what? The day of salvation. And when is the day of salvation? Today, the scripture says today, it's said several times, but in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 1 and 2, it declares, today is the day of salvation. And I'll submit to you that what this is about is that God is prepared to lengthen the day to whatever it takes, and however long it needs to be to bring about our salvation. So God is willing to give every one of us a double day so that we will do what? So that we will accept the day that's offered to us. In fact, God will make it not just a double day, a triple day, or just however long the day needs to be. So that we will accept, we will participate in the day of salvation.